Antinatalism. What if having children isn't the most selfless act but the most selfish? It might sound outrageous, even offensive, but this is the central idea behind antinatalism, a philosophical stance that questions one of humanity's most deeply held assumptions, that creating life is always good. To understand this perspective, imagine a thought experiment. You're holding a magical key. With one turn, you can bring someone into existence, a person who'll feel love, joy, laughter, but also pain, fear, and suffering. This new life doesn't ask to be born. They have no choice, no say. The decision is solely yours. Would you turn the key? This question is the heartbeat of antinatalism. Philosopher David Benatar, one of its leading voices, explores this idea in his provocative book, Better Never to Have Been. He proposes what he calls an asymmetry. If someone never exists, they don't experience pain, which is good. They also miss out on pleasure, but since they never existed, they don't suffer from that absence. However, once someone is born, suffering becomes inevitable. Even in the happiest lives, pain is part of the deal. According to Benatar, the moral weight of avoiding harm far outweighs the potential for joy. Creating life, then, is not an innocent act, but antinatalism isn't confined to abstract thought experiments. It also emerges from the brutal realities of our world. Wars, famine, mental illness, injustice, ecological disaster. Suffering isn't rare, it's everywhere. And even in safe, comfortable lives, there's heartbreak, anxiety, aging, and death. Some antinatalists argue that choosing to bring a child into this chaotic world is less an act of love and more an act of denial, of refusing to see how much pain life can contain. And in that denial lies a troubling form of selfishness. Philosopher Julio Cabrera takes a moral angle. He suggests that procreation violates ethical responsibility. When we create a child, we impose a lifetime of burdens on someone who never asked for them. According to Cabrera, this isn't an act of love, it's an exercise of power. A parent decides unilaterally, gambling someone else's entire future on the hope that things will turn out okay. And unlike other decisions, this one is irreversible. The stakes aren't theoretical, they're someone's entire existence. Antinatalism also intersects with ecological concerns. Les Knight, founder of the voluntary human extinction movement, believes that not reproducing could be an act of kindness, not just toward humans, but toward the planet. Human activity has devastated ecosystems, driven species to extinction, and triggered climate crises. From this view, our continued reproduction is not only unnecessary, but actively destructive. A world without humans, Knight argues, would not be a dystopia but a recovery. Nature would heal without us. Of course, critics of antinatalism push back. What about the joys of life? The warmth of human connection, the beauty of art, music, discovery. Don't these things make life worth it? Antinatalists respond that even the most joyful lives are haunted by the shadows of loss, uncertainty, and death. Joy is real, but it's temporary. Pain is real too and, they argue, more enduring. Even those who love their lives cannot escape its eventual end. Some say antinatalism is pessimistic, even nihilistic, but its advocates see it differently. To them, it's a philosophy of radical empathy, choosing not to impose the weight of existence on someone else. It's not a hatred of life, but a deep recognition of its cost. Let's return to that key. Would you turn it, knowing the risks? Would you create someone, knowing they'll suffer possibly, deeply, inevitably? Or would you pause, hold the key in your hand, and choose not to bring suffering into being? Antinatalism doesn't offer a rulebook. It simply asks you to ask the question and listen carefully to the silence of the life that was never forced to exist. Efilism. What if life itself, not just human life, but all life, was a tragic mistake? That's the haunting idea behind Efilism, a radical extension of antinatalism, where antinatalists question the ethics of creating human life. Efilists go much further. They argue that life, in every form, is fundamentally flawed. It's not just that some lives are painful, it's that life itself is built on a system of suffering, competition, and death. And the kindest, most ethical act might not be preserving life, but ending it. Picture a factory that has been running for billions of years. Its only function is to produce living beings, creatures, programmed to survive, to struggle, to reproduce, and inevitably to die. This factory doesn't have a purpose. It isn't driven by love or wisdom or any higher goal. It runs blindly, powered by evolution, whose only aim is replication. Efilists argue that this is the nature of life itself, an indifferent, mechanical process that perpetuates suffering without end. And once we recognize this, continuing the process becomes morally indefensible. Nature, which we often romanticize, becomes the key witness in this argument. Imagine a lion hunting a zebra. For the lion to live, the zebra must die violently, in fear and pain. But neither creature chose this scenario. The lion kills out of hunger. The zebra flees out of terror. This is not harmony. It's bloodshed dressed up as balance. Efilists see this cycle of predator and prey, of disease, fear, hunger, and death has not an unfortunate side effect of life, but its defining feature. And they don't just focus on the wild. Human lives, too, are filled with pain, heartbreak, aging, illness, mental anguish, and at the end of it all, death. Efilism asks a devastatingly simple question. Why continue this cycle? Evolution does not care whether we're happy. It cares only whether we survive long enough to reproduce. The systems that gave rise to life are not wise, they're brutal, thoughtless, and automatic. If a machine produced endless suffering, would we keep it running, or would we shut it down? Imagine a switch. If you flipped it, all sentient life would painlessly cease. No more fear, no more desperation, no more tiny creatures crushed underfoot or humans crying themselves to sleep. Would you flip that switch? Would ending suffering even at the cost of ending life be the greater kindness? This is the Efilist perspective. It's not born out of hatred for living beings, but out of love for them. It's not about desperates, about empathy. Efilists argue that to sustain a system built on pain is to endorse cruelty. If we truly care about animals, about each other, about the smallest beings capable of suffering, then the ethical path might not be to preserve life, but to end its factory altogether. Critics call this view nihilistic, dangerous, even mentally unstable. But Efilists respond with calm logic. If we wouldn't bring a person into a burning house, why bring them into a world where suffering is guaranteed? If we spend our lives trying to reduce pain, why allow a system that guarantees it continues forever? Efilism doesn't offer comfort. It doesn't sugarcoat existence. What it does offer is a brutally honest lens through which to see the world, a challenge to all our assumptions about the value of life. And it asks a final, shattering question. Is life truly a gift, or is it a sentence? Negative utilitarianism. Imagine a world where the ultimate moral goal is not to maximize happiness, but to minimize suffering. This is the foundation of negative utilitarianism, powerful and often controversial ethical framework. Unlike traditional utilitarianism, which seeks to increase the overall sum of happiness, negative utilitarianism makes the reduction or elimination of suffering the central moral imperative. It argues that avoiding harm should take precedence over the pursuit of pleasure, not because joy isn't valuable, but because suffering imposes a more urgent and unavoidable moral weight. Philosopher Karl Popper, one of the earliest proponents, believed that minimizing pain is a more compelling and concrete objective than maximizing pleasure, which is often vague, subjective, or fleeting. Pain, in contrast, is visceral and deeply impactful. Even a short burst of extreme suffering can ruin a life, while many small pleasures rarely make up for it. From this standpoint, every ethical decision should first ask, who is suffering, and how can that suffering be reduced? In practice, negative utilitarianism supports humanitarian efforts such as providing food, shelter, medical care, and psychological support actions that directly alleviate suffering. But it also pushes further, encouraging a more systemic approach. It asks societies and policymakers to prioritize the most vulnerable, those in chronic pain or enduring systemic injustice. It sees neglecting those most in distress as a moral failure, even if general happiness increases elsewhere. However, this framework raises controversial implications. For instance, if the reduction of suffering is the highest goal, some have argued that preventing all future suffering, even by halting human reproduction or extinguishing sentient life, could be morally justified. This overlaps with antinatalist and Efilist thinking and opens deeply uncomfortable philosophical territory. Would a painless end to existence be better than a life filled with even minimal suffering? Most negative utilitarians reject such radical conclusions, but acknowledge the tension between theory and practical ethics. Another significant challenge is measurement. Suffering is subjective. What torments one may barely register to another. Cultural, psychological, and situational factors all influence how suffering is experienced. This makes it difficult to create consistent ethical policies solely based on suffering. Moreover, how do we compare the suffering of a terminally ill person to the psychological stress of someone living in poverty or under oppression? Still, negative utilitarianism provides a sharp moral compass in a world often focused on growth, achievement, or happiness for the few. It invites humility, urging us to think less about how to be happy and more about how to reduce avoidable misery. In healthcare, social justice, environmental ethics, and global policy, this philosophy reminds us that the truest test of moral progress might be how well we care for the suffering, not how happy the happiest people can become. Ultimately, negative utilitarianism is not a denial of happiness, it's a call to compassion. It doesn't claim that joy is meaningless, but insists that no joy should come at the cost of preventable suffering. It challenges us to act not to create utopia, but to make life less unbearable for those most in pain. Even if the vision it offers is stark, Its heart lies in empathy, in the belief that easing pain, even a little, is one of the most meaningful things we can do. Voluntary human extinction movement. Picture a world without humans. Forests regrow, species once driven to extinction return, oceans begin to heal, and the sky clears of pollution. This is the vision behind the voluntary human extinction movement, VHEMT, a radical yet compassion-driven philosophy that suggests the most ethical path forward for humanity may be to voluntarily cease reproduction and allow our species to peacefully fade from existence. Unlike movements fueled by despair or hatred, VHEMT is rooted in ecological empathy for animals, ecosystems, and future generations who inherit the consequences of our actions. Founded by Let's Unite, the movement proposes a simple but unsettling idea that humanity's continued presence on Earth causes irreversible damage, and that the kindest act may be to stop creating new human lives. Every new person born consumes resources, creates waste, and unintentionally contributes to environmental degradation. From climate change and habitat destruction to species extinction and pollution, VHEMT argues that our very existence places unsustainable pressure on the planet. But this isn't a philosophy of doom or self-loathing. Its proponents emphasize voluntariness, no coercion, no violence, only a shared commitment to stop reproducing for the sake of a healthier Earth. They acknowledge that humans are capable of beauty, creativity, and compassion, yet these positive traits do not outweigh our broader ecological footprint. Even our best technologies, solar panels, electric cars, green infrastructure, still require extraction, energy, and compromise. From VHEMT's perspective, humanity's environmental burden isn't just a problem of bad choices. It's embedded in our scale and nature as a species. Critics of VHEMT raise valid concerns. Is extinction too extreme a response to environmental degradation? Might it be more hopeful and constructive to focus on transformation, living in balance with nature, rather than removing ourselves from it? Advocates of sustainability argue that we can change systems, reimagine economies, and adopt lifestyles that nurture the planet without requiring our disappearance. Moreover, some see value in human potential, the ability to heal, restore, and innovate. The possibility that humanity could someday serve as stewards rather than destroyers is not beyond reach. But VHEMT doesn't reject this possibility, simply questions its feasibility. Can 8 billion people, and potentially billions more, ever truly live in harmony with finite planetary systems? Can empathy and restraint outpace the machinery of consumption and growth? The movement's answer is a sobering one: perhaps not. VHEMT urges us to consider that even well-meaning reforms often fail to address the root issue, or sheer presence and population density. The philosophy also engages in a deeper ethical discussion. What is our responsibility toward the future? Is it more moral to create new lives in a world increasingly marked by crisis, or to spare future beings from the inevitable hardships of existence? Supporters of VHEMT often frame their choice as one of radical compassion on an act of despair, but of foresight and humility. They argue that choosing not to reproduce is not a loss of hope, but a legacy of care for all life, not just our own. Ultimately, the voluntary human extinction movement forces us to confront difficult truths, our impact, our place, and our purpose. It asks us to imagine a form of progress not defined by expansion, but by relinquishment, not by conquest, but by coexistence, whether or not one agrees with its conclusions. VHEMT offers a powerful lens through which to view the ecological crisis not as a problem with technical fixes, but as a moral and existential dilemma. The movement's message may seem radical, even unsettling, but its underlying motive is one of extraordinary compassion, a willingness to give up the future of one species so that all others might thrive. The repugnant conclusion: what if a world filled with billions of people living lives barely worth living is considered morally better than a smaller world where everyone experiences true happiness? This is the unsettling paradox known as the repugnant conclusion, a concept introduced by philosopher Derek Parfit in his groundbreaking book Reasons and Persons. It challenges our most basic intuitions about what makes a world morally good and forces us to wrestle with uncomfortable truths about happiness, population ethics, and the arithmetic of value. The repugnant conclusion arises from a particular line of reasoning within utilitarian population ethics, a field that seeks to maximize total happiness or well-being. Imagine a small society in which each person lives an exceptionally rich and fulfilling life full of love, achievement, and deep personal satisfaction. Now imagine gradually adding more and more people to this society. Each added person lives a life that is less fulfilling, perhaps marked by monotony or mild suffering, but still above the threshold of worth living. As the population increases, the average quality of life declines, but the total sum of happiness rises since more people are experiencing lives with a net positive value. If we follow this logic to its extreme, we reach a hypothetical world filled with billions or even trillions of people whose lives are only marginally worth living. Despite their limited joy and pervasive hardship, this world, under a strict total utilitarian view, is considered morally superior because its aggregate happiness surpasses that of the smaller, flourishing society. This conclusion feels deeply counterintuitive, even morally grotesque. It seems absurd, even dystopian, to suggest that a world teeming with lives of quiet desperation could be preferable to one of fewer but deeply enriched lives. And yet, if we adhere rigidly to utilitarianism, we accept that more happiness is always better, regardless of its distribution. We are logically led to endorse this unsettling scenario. One of the reasons this conclusion feels so disturbing is because it reduces people to data points. It treats individuals not as sentient beings with complex inner worlds, but as interchangeable units in a moral calculus. The rich and textured experience of a deeply fulfilled life is flattened into a mere numerical value, one that can be traded off for many shallow, marginally happy lives. But can the joy of one truly flourishing person be morally equivalent or even inferior to the minimal satisfaction of countless others? Philosophers have proposed various responses to avoid this outcome. Some reject total utilitarianism altogether, claiming it is too simplistic and reductive. They argue that a truly ethical framework must account for more than just happiness. It must include justice, dignity, autonomy, and the quality of lived experience. Others have turned to the average utility principle, which prioritizes the average happiness per person rather than the total. Under this principle, The smaller world, with high average well-being, might be seen as superior. But this too leads to disturbing implications. It could, in theory, justify eliminating less happy individuals to raise the average. Still others argue that creating new people doesn't carry the same moral weight as improving the lives of those who already exist. This view, known as person-affecting ethics, holds that morality should concern itself with benefiting actual people rather than hypothetical ones. In this framework, adding new individuals doesn't necessarily make the world better, unless those individuals have especially good lives. Simply increasing numbers for the sake of aggregate happiness might therefore be morally irrelevant or even wrong. The repugnant conclusion isn't just a theoretical puzzle. It has real-world implications, from how governments plan population policy to how we think about procreation and sustainability. Should a society prioritize the well-being of a smaller, stable population or expand in pursuit of numerical utility? Should resources be stretched thin to provide basic needs for more people, or concentrated to ensure deep well-being for fewer? These are not just mathematical questions, they are profoundly ethical dilemmas. Derek Parfit's exploration of this paradox has sparked decades of debate and led to new fields of moral inquiry, including non-identity problems and future generations' ethics. It challenges us to rethink the way we value life, happiness, and even existence itself. Is happiness an objective metric, or is it too fluid, too individual, to be captured in aggregate form? Can moral reasoning ever be free from contradiction, or are we destined to navigate a world of irreconcilable trade-offs? Ultimately, the repugnant conclusion is not just a flaw in a theory. It is a mirror that reflects the limitations of how we think about ethics. It asks us to confront the tension between intuition and logic, between the individual and the collective, between quality and quantity. It doesn't offer easy answers, but in forcing us to ask the right questions, it deepens our understanding of what it truly means to build a better world. The problem of suffering. Why does suffering exist in a world that also creates beauty, love, and joy? If life is capable of producing awe-inspiring moments of connection, creativity, and meaning, why is it also marked by deep pain, relentless loss, and cruelty beyond comprehension? This haunting paradox is known as the problem of suffering, and it has challenged humanity's deepest beliefs for centuries. At its heart lies a disturbing question, not just why suffering happens, but what it signifies about existence, justice, and the structure of reality itself. Suffering is universal, cutting across all boundaries of class, culture, and belief. It comes in countless forms: physical pain, emotional grief, existential despair. It afflicts the innocent and the guilty alike. No one, no matter how privileged or powerful, escapes it. This common thread of pain unites us in a strange, uncomfortable solidarity. But that universality only deepens the mystery. Why should suffering be such a foundational part of life? Is it merely a byproduct of biology and randomness, or does it serve some deeper function, moral, spiritual, or philosophical? The problem of suffering is especially challenging for theistic worldviews. If there is a God who is both omnipotent and benevolent, why would such a being allow innocent children to suffer, natural disasters to devastate communities, or diseases to torment millions? This contradiction between divine goodness and the existence of intense sufferings known as the problem of evil. Some theological perspectives suggest that suffering has a purpose. It strengthens character, tests faith, or plays a role in a divine plan too vast for human comprehension. Others claim that free will is the root cause, that in order for love and morality to exist, humans must be free to choose, and with that freedom comes the possibility of harm. Yet these answers often feel inadequate in the face of extreme pain. When confronted with genocide, child abuse, or terminal illness, abstract theodicies can feel detached, even cruel. The question remains, if God could prevent such suffering, why doesn't he? And if he can't, is he truly all-powerful? If he won't, is he truly good? Secular philosophies offer a different lens. Evolutionary biology sees pain as a survival mechanism. Physical pain alerts us to danger. Emotional suffering, like grief and fear, can serve as social and psychological tools that help us adapt and protect ourselves. From this perspective, suffering isn't moral or cosmic, it's mechanical. It's not punishment or trial. It's a functional part of being alive. But this explanation, while grounded in science, often lacks emotional resonance. Understanding that pain has evolutionary value doesn't make it any easier to endure, to justify. Existentialist thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre confronted suffering head-on, rejecting any notion of cosmic order or divine justice. For Nietzsche, suffering was not something to be escaped, but embraced as a source of strength and transformation. He argued that the depth of one's suffering could directly shape the depth of one's growth. Sartre, on the other hand, viewed suffering as the inevitable cost of human freedom. Our ability to make choices, dream, and pursue meaning opens us up to failure, alienation, and loss. In this view, suffering is not a flaw in life, is the very condition that makes life meaningful. In Buddhist thought, suffering is not a mystery, but a central truth. The first noble truth of Buddhism is that life is marked by, commonly translated as suffering or dissatisfaction. According to the Buddha, suffering arises from desire, attachment, and ignorance. We cling to people, pleasures, and outcomes, forgetting that all things are impermanent. This gap between what we want and what reality offers is the root of our pain. The path to peace, then, is not to eliminate suffering, but to transcend it through mindfulness, ethical living, and spiritual insight, rather than asking, why do we suffer? Buddhism invites us to explore how we relate to suffering and how we might liberate ourselves from it. Modern psychology adds yet another layer. Cognitive science shows that suffering is often magnified by our interpretations. It's not just what happens to us, but how we process those events, how we label them, replay them, and build narratives around them. A breakup, for example, may hurt not only because of lost love, but because we tell ourselves it means we're unworthy or unlovable. Therapy, approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness-based stress reduction, aim to disrupt these cycles. By shifting our mental habits, we can ease suffering even if we can't eliminate it altogether. In recent decades, the question of suffering has entered technological and futuristic debates. Some philosophers and scientists suggest that suffering might one day be engineered out of existence. With advances in neuroscience, genetic editing, and artificial intelligence, could we redesign the human experience to eliminate pain? Should we? If suffering can be removed, what happens to the wisdom, empathy, and growth it often produces? Would a life without suffering be richer, or would it lose something essential? Ultimately, the problem of suffering isn't just theoretically deeply personal. Every human life encounters pain, loss, and heartbreak. And while some find answers in faith, philosophy, or science, others live without resolution, simply trying to endure. But across traditions and disciplines, one idea seems to recur, that in facing suffering, not escaping it, we uncover something essential about who we are. It reveals our limits, but also our capacity for compassion, resilience, and transformation. Suffering is a paradox. It is both universal and intimate, both destructive and illuminating. It breaks us down, but it also binds us together. In our attempts to understand it, we touch the edges of what it means to be human. Perhaps the true challenge is not to solve suffering, but to walk with it, to make space for its mystery, and in doing so, to live more fully, more honestly, and more connected to one another. Existential nihilism. Existential nihilism is the philosophical view that life has no inherent meaning or purpose. According to this perspective, the universe is indifferent to human existence. It neither cares about us nor about anything we strive for. Success, love, knowledge, and all human pursuits are ultimately fleeting and will dissolve into nothingness. This stark reality lies at the core of existential nihilism, a philosophy that strips away comforting illusions and challenges us to face existence as it truly is. For many, this realization feels like staring into an abyss of vast emptiness, where purpose and value crumble under the weight of cosmic indifference. Existential nihilism gained prominence through the works of 19th-century thinkers like Kierkegaard, Fyodor Dostoevsky, and Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche, in particular, saw the collapse of traditional religious and moral structures as a profound turning point for humanity. With the death of God, society lost the unifying framework that had for centuries given life coherence and purpose. Without a divine plan or higher authority, Nietzsche argued, humanity was left to navigate an empty universe devoid of ultimate meaning or direction. This absence of inherent meaning extends beyond grand questions about existence to permeate the minutiae of life, the work we do, the relationships we form, the goals we chase. None of these hold intrinsic value beyond what we assign to them. Or, to the existential nihilist, this is not necessarily a cause for pessimism or despair, but rather a reflection of reality. The universe operates according to indifferent laws, and any meaning we find in life is purely a human construction. Jean-Paul Sartre, an existentialist philosopher often associated with nihilistic ideas, offered a unique perspective on this void. He argued that the lack of inherent meaning is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be accepted. Sartre believed that humans are condemned to be free, meaning that in the absence of a predetermined purpose, we bear the ultimate responsibility to create our own values and meaning. This freedom is both exhilarating and deeply unsettling, as it places the burden of defining our lives squarely on our shoulders, with no external guide to follow. For many, existential nihilism evokes a sense of despair. If life has no objective meaning, why bother with anything at all? This question has haunted humanity for centuries, giving rise to what is often called the existential crisis, a profound confrontation with the emptiness of existence. Yet not all who grapple with nihilism succumb to despair. Some find a strange liberation in acknowledging life's lack of inherent purpose. By rejecting imposed meanings, they feel free to live authentically, unburdened by societal expectations or arbitrary standards. However, this freedom comes with challenges. Without a universal framework, how do we determine what is good or bad, worthwhile or wasteful? Nihilism offers no clear answers. It does not tell us how to live or what to value. Instead, it forces us to confront our own capacity for meaning-making. For some, this leads to a deeper appreciation of life's fleeting moments, sunset, a shared laugh, a quiet walk, precisely because they are temporary and unbound by cosmic significance. Critics of existential nihilism often accuse it of being overly bleak or even destructive, arguing that a worldview devoid of meaning can lead to apathy, selfishness, or moral chaos. Yet many philosophers and artists have used nihilism as a starting point for profound creativity and insight. Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov, explores the moral implications of a world without God, asking whether humanity can maintain morality without divine authority. Albert Camus, while not strictly a nihilist, engaged with similar themes in his concept of the absurd, the tension between our desire for meaning and the universe's indifference. Camus famously asked whether life is worth living in the face of this absurdity. His answer was not to abandon life, but to embrace its contradictions. In works like The Myth of Sisyphus, he argued that we must imagine Sisyphus condemned to endlessly roll a boulder uphill as happy the act of living, of continuing despite the lack of ultimate meaning, becomes an act of rebellion against the void. Existential nihilism does not offer solutions or solace, nor does it promise a brighter future or hidden truth waiting to be discovered. Instead, it strips away illusions and challenges us to confront the stark reality of existence and decide what to do with it. For some, this confrontation is paralyzing. For others, it is a call to create, to act, and to live as fully as possible, despite life's impermanence. In the end, existential nihilism leaves us with a paradox. By denying inherent meaning, it forces us to recognize the immense power we have to shape our own lives. The absence of cosmic purpose does not negate the value of existence. It shifts the focus to the here and now, to the choices we make and the relationships we form. It is both a burden and a gift, a reminder that while the universe may be indifferent, our lives are ours to define. The meaning of suffering. Suffering is inevitable. It touches every life in every corner of the world, leaving no one untouched. But why does suffering exist? Is it merely a cruel accident of life, or does it serve a deeper purpose? The question of the meaning of suffering has haunted humanity for millennia, inspiring some of our most profound philosophies, religions, and works of art. At its core, suffering raises questions about existence itself. Why must living beings endure pain, loss, and despair? For many, suffering seems to undermine the very idea of a just or meaningful universe. And yet, some argue that suffering is not just an unfortunate byproduct of existence, but a force that shapes us, challenges us, and paradoxically gives life depth and meaning. This is not to say we eliminate suffering entirely, but that we learn to navigate it with greater clarity. Religious traditions provide powerful interpretations of suffering as well. In Christianity, suffering is often seen as a test of faith or a path to redemption. The story of Job, for example, explores the endurance of a man who loses everything yet continues to trust in God through his trials. Job's suffering becomes a means of deepening his relationship with the divine, even if the reasons for his pain remain incomprehensible. This perspective does not necessarily explain suffering, but reframes it as something that can transform and elevate the human spirit. In Buddhism, suffering is placed at the center of its teachings. The first noble truth states that life is marked by suffering dukkha, caused by desire and attachment. This suffering is not punishment, but a natural consequence of craving permanence in an impermanent world. The Buddha's path to enlightenment offers a way to transcend suffering, not by avoiding it, but by understanding its roots and learning to let go. This approach views suffering as a teacher, guiding us toward insight and liberation. For existentialist philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, suffering is an essential part of growth and self-discovery. Nietzsche famously declared that what does not kill us makes us stronger. He believed suffering was not to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and creativity. Life's greatest challenges, he argued, force us to confront our limitations and push beyond them, transforming pain into power. For Nietzsche, suffering was not just a condition to endure, but a force that could fuel human greatness. Not everyone agrees that suffering has meaning. Many nihilists view suffering simply as a fact of life, random, meaningless, and indifferent. It has no deeper purpose or cosmic justification. This perspective can be both freeing and unsettling. It absolves us from needing to find meaning in our pain, but it also leaves us to face suffering without the comfort of larger narratives. Modern psychology offers yet another perspective, focusing on how humans process and respond to suffering. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote extensively about the meaning of suffering in his book Man's Search for Meaning. Drawing on his experiences in concentration camps, Frankl argued that while we cannot always control the suffering we endure, we can choose how we respond to it. For Frankl, the ability to find meaning even in the darkest circumstances defines humanity. He saw suffering as an opportunity to rise above our circumstances and affirm the value of life. Science sheds light on the nature of suffering, particularly its role in evolution. Pain serves as a survival mechanism, warning us of danger and helping us avoid harm. Emotional suffering, such as grief or loneliness, strengthens social bonds and promotes cooperation essential for the survival of social species. While these explanations do not offer moral or philosophical meaning, they reveal suffering as an integral part of life's design, shaping how we interact with the world and each other. In the modern world, where suffering often feels overwhelming, wars, pandemics, environmental crises, it is easy to see it as an insurmountable burden. Yet some argue suffering can inspire acts of compassion and solidarity. In moments of collective hardship, people often come together to support one another, finding strength and meaning in shared humanity. This does not erase the pain, but transforms it into something that connects and uplifts. Suffering forces us to ask difficult questions. It challenges our assumptions, tests our resilience, and compels us to confront life's fragility. Whether we find meaning in it or not, suffering remains one of the most profound and universal aspects of existence. It is a mirror reflecting our vulnerability and a crucible in which our character is forged. Ultimately, the meaning of suffering is deeply personal. For some, it is a source of spiritual growth. For others, a reminder of life's harsh indifference. And for many, simply an undeniable fact of existence that must be faced and endured. What unites these perspectives is the recognition that suffering, though painful, is an integral part of being alive. In understanding it, we come closer to understanding ourselves and the complex, fragile, and extraordinary experience of life. The absurd. Have you ever found yourself staring into the vastness of the night sky, searching for a sign, a reason, or some grand purpose behind your existence? This desperate search for meaning, paired with the unsettling silence of the cosmos, is what the French philosopher Albert Camus called the absurd. At its core, the absurd captures the profound conflict between our deeply human need to find meaning and the universe's cold indifferency, tension that shapes how we live and understand ourselves. From the moment we become aware of our existence, we are driven by an urgent desire to explain why we are here. We want answers to the big questions. Why do we suffer? What is the point of all this? Our minds reach for comfort in religion, philosophy, art, and science, hoping that one of these paths will unlock the ultimate truth. But no matter how exhaustive our search, the universe remains mute. It offers no master plan, no divine author, no cosmic blueprint to assure us that life has inherent meaning. This deafening silence can feel like the universe's greatest betrayal, like it's withholding something essential we deserve to know. Consider the daily grind, waking up each morning, going to work or school, dealing with the same people and the same challenges, and then returning to sleep only to repeat the cycle again tomorrow. Or think about chasing a long-held dream, investing years of effort, only to discover that the fulfillment we expected never arrives. These experiences reveal the absurd, not as a grand cosmic revelation, but as a quiet, persistent gap between our hopes and reality. It's the gap where our craving for meaning meets the universe's unyielding emptiness. Many people respond to this discomfort by seeking refuge in comforting answers, whether that's religious faith, political ideology, or social conventions. Camus famously called this philosophical suicide because it involves surrendering the freedom that comes from honestly confronting the absurd. Instead of wrestling with life's contradictions, one clings to ready-made narratives, trading authenticity for security. But for Camus, this is a betrayal of what makes life interesting and worthwhile. His alternative was bold and revolutionary: embrace the absurd. Instead of denying or escaping it, we should stare it in the face and accept it. This acceptance doesn't lead to despair, but rather to a unique kind of freedom. Once we acknowledge that life has no inherent meaning, we are liberated to create our own purpose and live authentically. It's about finding joy in the struggle itself, appreciating the fleeting moments of beauty and chaos without demanding a higher reason. To illustrate his philosophy, Camus turned to the Greek myth of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down, over and over, for eternity. At first glance, Sisyphus's punishment seems the ultimate symbol of futility and despair. But Camus saw something different, a figure of defiance and strength. By choosing to continue pushing the boulder, despite its absurdity, Sisyphus asserts his freedom and refuses to let meaninglessness crush his spirit. Camus concludes with the powerful image: one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Happiness here is not blind optimism, but a fierce, courageous acceptance of reality. Camus' vision challenges traditional ideas of success and failure. in a universe without preordained purpose. It's not about achieving greatness or leaving a lasting legacy, but about engaging with life honestly and courageously. This outlook frees us from the pressure to conform to societal expectations or chase goals that don't resonate with our true selves. It asks us to let go of comforting illusions and face life exactly as it is. Living with the absurd isn't easy. It demands that we abandon the search for definitive answers that don't exist and instead focus on the experience of living itself. In doing so, we find a profound form of freedom that transforms life's unpredictability and meaninglessness into a source of strength. The absurd becomes not a curse but an opportunity to live fully, to love deeply, and to embrace the chaos with open arms. In the end, Camus' philosophy teaches us that meaning is not something we find in the stars or scriptures, something we create with every choice, every act of rebellion, and every moment of joy. By accepting life's contradictions without flinching, we reclaim our freedom and discover a happiness uniquely our own. Life, with all its strangeness and struggle, becomes an adventure worth living. Life as a cosmic accident. Imagine for a moment that everything you are, every moment of your life, is the result of a cosmic accident. There was no grand design, no master plan, no higher being who crafted life with a purpose in mind. Instead, life is the outcome of an extraordinary series of random events unfolding in a universe utterly indifferent to our existence. To understand this, we need to go back about 13.8 billion years to the Big Bang, the explosive beginning of space, time, and matter itself. From a point smaller than an atom, the universe expanded rapidly in chaos. Particles collided, energies surged, and slowly, atoms formed. Gravity gathered these atoms into stars and galaxies. But all this happened without intention or direction. It was nature unfolding, according to physical laws, indifferent to what would come next. Around 4.6 billion years ago, in a relatively ordinary corner of the cosmos, our sun was born. The leftover dust and debris from its formation clumped together, eventually forming planets, including our own Earth. Here, an astonishing alignment of chance events took place: a stable orbit, a protective atmosphere, and temperatures just right for liquid water to exist. Earth had won the cosmic lottery. Life began in Earth's oceans as simple organic molecules, formed by chemical reactions under specific conditions. Over time, these molecules combined and organized into self-replicating structures, the very first forms of life. From this humble beginning, evolution took over. Mutations occurred randomly, and those that gave creatures a survival edge persisted. Over billions of years, this process crafted the incredible diversity of life we see today. Life are so improbable they verge on miraculous, and yet no evidence suggests any cosmic designer or purpose behind it all. It's pure coincidence and natural law. This realization can shake our worldview. On one hand, it highlights how extraordinary and fragile life is. The odds that intelligent beings capable of reflection would arise in this vast universe are astronomical. On the other hand, it reminds us that we are not the center of the cosmos. The universe existed long before us and will continue long after we are gone. Our lives, achievements, and civilizations are but fleeting blips in the cosmic timeline. Many grapple with what this means for meaning. If life is a cosmic accident, does that mean it's meaningless? If the universe is indifferent, why bother caring? Existentialists see this absence of inherent meaning not as despair but as freedom. Because life has no predetermined purpose, we have the power to create our own. Even scientists find inspiration in this cosmic randomness. Carl Sagan famously called humans star stuff, reminding us that the elements in our bodies were forged inside dying stars. This connection to the universe brings a sense of awe and humility. We are tiny, yet deeply linked to the cosmos itself. Viewing life as a cosmic accident also shifts how we relate to the natural world. If we emerged by chance, so did every other living creature. This perspective can deepen our empathy for all life, fostering a sense of kinship with the tiniest microbe and the largest whale. It underscores that we are part of nature's fragile web, not masters of it. This understanding also highlights our responsibility. Life on Earth is precious and precarious. Protecting it isn't about fulfilling a cosmic purpose, but recognizing the value of this rare, miraculous accident. It urges us to act with care and respect toward the planet and all its inhabitants. In the end, embracing life as a cosmic accident invites us to accept uncertainty and abandon the hope for cosmic guarantees. Instead, it encourages us to find beauty, meaning, and joy in the randomness of existence. Our lives may not have been planned or predestined, but they are ours full of wonder, choice, and possibility. In a universe indifferent to our presence, simply living, loving, and wondering becomes the most profound expression of what it means to be alive. The hedonistic treadmill. Have you ever noticed how happiness seems to slip away just as you think you've caught it? We chase after new goals, dream of bigger achievements, and convince ourselves that if only we had more money, more success, more love, we'd finally feel content. But once we get those things, the joy quickly fades, and the cycle starts all over again. This frustrating, endless pursuit is what psychologists call the hedonistic treadmill concept that reveals how our search for happiness often keeps us running in place. The hedonistic treadmill, also known as hedonic adaptation, describes our tendency to return to a stable baseline level of happiness, no matter what happens in our lives. When we achieve something long awaited, a promotion, a new relationship, or a dream vacation, we experience a surge of happiness. But over time, that initial excitement fades as we get used to the change. On the flip side, negative events like job loss or breakups cause an initial drop in happiness, but eventually we recover and return to our usual emotional state. This pattern isn't just something we feel, it's backed by extensive research. Studies show that even life-altering events, such as winning the lottery or suffering a serious injury, don't have as lasting an impact on happiness as we might expect. People who win millions often find themselves no happier a year later than they were before the windfall. Likewise, those who endure hardships usually adapt and find ways to rebuild their sense of well-being. What does this tell us? That happiness is more complex than simply acquiring new things or avoiding pain. This doesn't mean happiness is impossible, far from it, but it challenges our assumptions about what will make us happy. We often imagine that changing external circumstances, more money, a better job, a bigger house will transform our lives. Yet, as we adapt, what once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary. The dream house turns into just a house. The exciting job becomes just work. This adaptation is what keeps us trapped on the treadmill, constantly seeking the next thing that might bring lasting fulfillment. The roots of the hedonistic treadmill lie deep in our evolutionary past. Our ancestors survived by continually striving for more: food, shelter, safety. Complacency meant danger. This relentless drive was crucial for survival. But in today's world, it often leaves us feeling perpetually unsatisfied. No matter what we achieve, it rarely feels like enough. Understanding the hedonistic treadmill can help us break free from its hold. One important insight is that material wealth and external success have diminishing returns when it comes to happiness. Research suggests that money can boost well-being up to a point by meeting basic needs and reducing financial stress, but beyond that, its effect on happiness plateaus. After reaching financial stability, accumulating more wealth doesn't significantly increase life satisfaction. Yet, many of us continue chasing more, believing it holds the key to joy. Another way to step off the treadmill is to prioritize experiences over possessions. Studies indicate that experiences like travel, learning new skills, or spending time with loved ones tend to bring more lasting happiness than material goods. This happens because experiences create memories and deepen our connections with others. While possessions quickly lose their novelty, investing in relationships, personal growth, and meaningful activities can provide fulfillment that material success often can't match. Gratitude is a powerful tool against hedonic adaptation. By consciously appreciating what we already have, we shift our focus from what's missing to what's present. Practicing gratitude has been shown to boost happiness, reduce stress, and strengthen relationships. It reminds us that contentment doesn't come from accumulating more, but from valuing what's already in our lives. Alongside gratitude, mindfulness plays a crucial role in escaping the treadmill. Mindfulness teaches us to be fully present, appreciating the simple pleasures of life without constantly yearning for something else. It helps us recognize when we're trapped in the cycle of wanting, and reminds us that happiness is not a destination but a state of being. While the hedonistic treadmill reveals the challenges of maintaining happiness, it also highlights our resilience. Our ability to adapt to both good and bad experiences speaks to the human capacity for growth and recovery. Life will always have its ups and downs, but knowing how hedonic adaptation works can help us approach these fluctuations with greater balance and awareness. The treadmill doesn't mean we should stop striving or giving our best. Ambition and progress are vital parts of life, but it does challenge us to pause and reflect. Why are we pursuing certain things? Are they truly fulfilling, or are we just running in circles? Ultimately, the hedonistic treadmill isn't about the things we chase, it's about how we engage with life. By shifting our focus from external achievements to inner contentment, we can begin to step off the endless cycle of striving. The treadmill may be part of human nature, but with awareness and intention, we can learn to walk at our own pace, savoring the journey instead of endlessly chasing the finish line. Philosophical pessimism. Life is often characterized by struggle, suffering, and an endless array of unfulfilled desires. This sobering outlook forms the foundation of philosophical pessimism, a tradition of thought that challenges the common narratives of progress, happiness, and inherent meaning that dominate much of Western philosophy and popular culture. rather than denying or the difficulties of existence. Philosophical pessimism confronts them head-on. It is not a doctrine meant to depress or discourage, but one that encourages honesty about the realities of life and invites a deeper reflection on what it means to be human. The origins of philosophical pessimism are often traced back to the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860, who articulated one of the most profound critiques of human existence. For Schopenhauer, the fundamental source of suffering is the will to live, a blind, relentless, and insatiable force that drives all living beings to persist in existence. This will manifests itself as ceaseless striving, a never-ending pursuit of desires. Yet, paradoxically, each fulfilled desire only gives rise to a new desire, ensuring a perpetual state of dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer saw this endless cycle as the root of human misery. The brief moments of happiness we experience are merely temporary pauses in a life otherwise dominated by pain and frustration. This cycle of desire and dissatisfaction is not just a feature of human life, but is inherent to all existence. Suffering, for Schopenhauer, is woven into the very fabric of reality, from the predator-prey relationship to the inevitability of sickness and death. Even the joys and pleasures that punctuate our lives are ephemeral and often come at the expense of others. This worldview is stark and uncompromising. Schopenhauer did not believe in progress in the usual sense. He saw life itself as an ongoing struggle marked more by suffering than by joy. In his famous work, The World as Will and Representation, he argued that the best we could hope for is to minimize suffering and perhaps even to escape it through aesthetic contemplation or ascetic denial of the will. While Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900, inherited many of Schopenhauer's themes, he took philosophical pessimism in a different direction. Nietzsche recognized the harshness and cruelty of existence, but rejected resignation or despair. Instead, he proposed a philosophy of affirmation. For Nietzsche, life's suffering and chaos are not reasons to give up, but essential parts of what it means to be alive. Nietzsche urged humanity to embrace life amor fati, a love of fate accepting everything that happens, including pain and hardship, as necessary and valuable. He believed that through struggle and overcoming, individuals could achieve greatness and self-realization. Unlike Schopenhauer, Nietzsche didn't see the will to live as a burden to escape, but as a force to harness and transform. This attitude is encapsulated in his concept of the Bermensch, or overman, an individual who creates their own values in a meaningless world and lives courageously in defiance of suffering and despair. Nietzsche's perspective brings a dynamic tension to pessimism, recognizing life's difficulties without surrendering to them, instead using them as fuel for growth and creativity. Philosophical pessimism also finds a deeply personal voice in the writings of Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran, 1911 to 1995. Cioran's work is suffused with reflections on the absurdity and futility of existence, the inevitability of death, and the fragility of human hopes and ambitions. Unlike Schopenhauer's metaphysical pessimism or Nietzsche's heroic affirmation, Cioran's approach is more poetic and introspective. He portrayed life as a continuous struggle against despair, where moments of lucidity often reveal the profound emptiness beneath our pursuits. For Cioran, pessimism was not a problem to be fixed or a mood to be escaped, but a clear lens through which to see life's contradictions honestly. His aphoristic style, and raw emotional honesty capture the existential anguish many people feel but rarely articulate. Sioran's reflections remind us that pessimism can also be a form of intellectual freedom, a rejection of comforting illusions in favor of truth, no matter how unsettling. His work encourages a contemplation of suffering and finitude without illusions or distractions. One of the most important contributions of philosophical pessimism is its critique of the widely accepted narrative of progress. In modern Western culture, we tend to believe that human history is a story of constant improvement, whether through technology, societal development, or personal growth. Philosophical pessimists, however, challenge this view. They argue that despite advancements and changes, the fundamental nature of human suffering remains unchanged. Technology may alleviate certain physical hardships, but it can also generate new anxieties, isolation, or environmental crises. Societal progress might improve material conditions, but cannot erase the existential realities of death, loss, and the search for meaning. Similarly, pessimism questions the widespread pursuit of happiness as life's ultimate goal. The relentless chase for happiness, often defined in terms of pleasure, success, or external achievement, can lead to disappointment, as happiness is fleeting and often elusive. Philosophical pessimism encourages acceptance of life's imperfections and contradictions, emphasizing that the pressure to find lasting contentment can itself be a source of suffering. Instead of idealizing happiness as a permanent state, pessimists urge us to embrace a more nuanced view, to accept the coexistence of suffering and joy, and to find meaning in navigating life's challenges rather than escaping them. A powerful aspect of philosophical pessimism is its potential to foster solidarity and compassion. By recognizing that suffering is a universal experience shared by all beings, pessimism breaks down illusions of isolation and self-sufficiency. It emphasizes our common vulnerability and interconnectedness. If pain and struggle are unavoidable parts of life, then understanding and empathy become crucial. This shared human condition can inspire us to care for one another, not because life is perfect or just, but because we are all navigating its difficulties together. Philosophical pessimism, in this sense, encourages a communal response to suffering grounded in compassion and mutual support. In a world that often glorifies positivity, success, and relentless optimism, philosophical pessimism serves as an important counterbalance. It reminds us that struggle, hardship, and disappointment are natural and valid aspects of existence. This acknowledgement doesn't lead to nihilism or despair, but provides a grounding realism that can help us maintain perspective in difficult times. By accepting life's darker aspects, we can approach existence with humility and resilience. Pessimism invites us to stop pretending that life should be easy or fair, and instead to develop the strength to endure and find meaning within life's complexities. Philosophical pessimism is sometimes misunderstood as simply negative or defeatist. Critics argue that it overlooks beauty, joy, and human potential. But most pessimists do not deny these positive aspects. Rather, they insist that acknowledging suffering is necessary to fully appreciate life's richness. Ignoring or minimizing pain can lead to shallow or unrealistic worldviews. Pessimism, instead, asks us to hold the full spectrum of experience, light and dark, simultaneously, fostering a more complete and honest engagement with life. Philosophical pessimism offers no easy answers or comforting promises. It does not claim that life has a hidden meaning waiting to be discovered, nor does it assure a future free of pain. Instead, it calls us to confront reality without illusions, to face suffering without turning away. This confrontation, while challenging, can be profoundly liberating. By releasing unrealistic expectations, we free ourselves to live authentically and fully, finding meaning in the very act of existing amidst life's contradictions. Ultimately, philosophical pessimism is a philosophy of honesty about suffering, about joy, about hope, and about despair. It reveals the complexity of being human, a tapestry woven from pain and pleasure, struggle and resilience, doubt and courage. Embracing this reality allows us to engage with life deeply and courageously, aware of its challenges but also capable of profound connection and meaning. Eco-philosophy. Humanity has built a world that often forgets its roots. Cities rise, resources are extracted, and ecosystems are reshaped, all to serve human needs. But at what cost? Eco-philosophy and deep ecology challenge this dominant way of thinking, urging us to reconsider our relationship with the natural world. They confront the common assumption that humans are the center of existence, placing all life forms and ecosystems on equal footing. Eco-philosophy is a broad field exploring the ethical, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions of the environment. It is not just about preserving nature. It is about rethinking how we perceive and interact with the world around us. It challenges the anthropocentric mindset, the belief that humans are superior to other life forms, and that nature exists solely for our use. Instead, eco-philosophy proposes a holistic view where humans are one part of a vast interconnected web. One of the most influential movements within eco-philosophy is deep ecology, a term coined by Norwegian philosopher Arne Endes in the 1970s. Deep ecology goes beyond surface-level environmental concerns like pollution and resource management. While those issues are important, deep ecology argues that they address only symptoms rather than the root cause of environmental degradation, humanity's flawed relationship with nature. Deep ecology calls us to shift from a shallow, utilitarian view of the environment to a deeper understanding of the intrinsic value of all living beings. Under this framework, a tree is not valuable because it provides wood or absorbs carbon dioxide. It is valuable simply because it exists. This perspective challenges the exploitative mindset that has driven much of human progress, inviting us to see the natural world as a community to which we belong, rather than a resource to be used. At the heart of deep ecology lies the principle of biocentric equality, the idea that all living things have an equal right to live and flourish. This does not mean humans should abandon their needs or desires, but calls for a radical revaluation of our priorities. It asks us to consider the impact of our actions on the entire web of life, not just on ourselves. By recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings, deep ecology fosters a sense of humility and responsibility. The implications of deep ecology are profound. It challenges economic systems that prioritize growth and consumption over ecological balance. It questions narratives of human exceptionalism that justify the destruction of habitats and species. It calls for a transformation in how we approach everything from agriculture to energy production, emphasizing sustainability and coexistence rather than exploitation. Philosophers and activists within the deep ecology movement often highlight the spiritual dimensions of this perspective. They argue that reconnecting with nature is not just an ecological necessity, but a path to personal and collective well-being. Many indigenous traditions, for example, have long embraced the idea that humans are part of a larger natural order with responsibilities to the land and its inhabitants. Deep ecology draws inspiration. These worldviews seeking to integrate them into modern environmental thought. Critics of deep ecology sometimes argue that its principles are too idealistic or impractical in a world driven by economic and political interests. They question whether humanity can truly prioritize the needs of ecosystems over its own short-term goals. Others worry that deep ecology's emphasis on biocentric equality could lead to difficult ethical dilemmas, such as balancing human survival with the protection of other species. These criticisms highlight the tension between deep ecology's vision and the realities of human society. Despite these challenges, deep ecology offers a powerful lens through which to view the environmental crises of our time. It reminds us that ecosystem destruction is not just an environmental issue, it is a moral and philosophical failure. By treating nature as a commodity, we undermine the very systems that sustain life. Deep ecology invites us to imagine a different future, one where humanity lives in harmony with the earth, respecting its limits and celebrating its diversity. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology also provide practical guidance for individuals and communities. They encourage local sustainable practices that reduce harm to the environment. They promote education and awareness about the interdependence of life. They inspire grassroots movements that challenge the systems and policies driving ecological destruction. These efforts may not solve every problem, but represent crucial steps toward aligning human activities with the principles of deep ecology. Perhaps the most radical aspect of eco-philosophy and deep ecology is their call for a shift in consciousness. They ask us to move beyond seeing nature as something separate from ourselves and instead recognize that we are deeply embedded within it. This shift is not easy. It requires confronting long-held beliefs, rethinking values, and accepting that humanity is not the pinnacle of life, but one part of a larger whole. In a world facing climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion, the ideas of eco-philosophy and deep ecology are more relevant than ever. They challenge us to look beyond immediate solutions and address the deeper issues at the heart of the environmental crisis. They remind us that the health of the planet is inseparable from our own well-being, and that by caring for the earth, we are ultimately caring for ourselves. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology may not offer quick fixes, but they provide a vision of what is possible, a world where humanity learns to live within its means, respects the rights of all beings, and finds meaning not in domination but in connection. This vision is both a challenge and an invitation, calling us to rethink what it means to be human in a world that is infinitely larger and more complex than ourselves. Existential loneliness. No matter how connected we are, how deeply we love, or how closely we bond, there is a part of us that remains fundamentally alone. This is existential loneliness, a deep, pervasive sense of solitude that stems not from the absence of others, but from the nature of existence itself. It is the recognition that, as individuals, we are ultimately isolated in our inner experiences, carrying the weight of our existence alone. Existential loneliness is not about being physically alone. It is not the same as social isolation or the temporary feeling of missing someone. Instead, it is rooted in the realization that no one can fully understand or share the entirety of another person's inner world. No matter how well we articulate our thoughts or how closely we connect with someone, our subjective experiences remain uniquely ours. This inherent separateness is a condition of being human. Philosophers and writers have long grappled with this profound sense of isolation. Kierkegaard, often regarded as the father of existentialism, spoke of the individual's relationship to existence as a solitary journey. He believed that confronting this solitude was essential for personal growth and authenticity. For Kierkegaard, the individual must face the truth of their aloneness to live a meaningful and authentic life. In this sense, existential loneliness is not just a burden. It is also a call to engage with oneself deeply and honestly. Friedrich Nietzsche explored a similar idea through his concept of the Bermensch, or overman. He saw the journey toward self-realization as inherently solitary, requiring individuals to transcend societal norms and find their own values. For Nietzsche, existential loneliness was a necessary part of this process. It was not something to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and individuality. The loneliness of standing apart from the crowd and forging one's own path was central to his vision of a fulfilled life. Existential loneliness is also tied to our awareness of mortality. As conscious beings, we understand that our lives are finite, and no one else can share the experience of our death. This knowledge creates a profound sense of solitude as we realize that we alone must face the uncertainty of what lies beyond. For Martin Heidegger, this awareness of mortality was central to the human condition. He described the concept of being toward death, emphasizing that the inevitability of death shapes how we live and how we confront our own existence. Existential loneliness in this context is inescapable. It is woven into our awareness of life's fragility. At the same time, existential loneliness can be a source of creativity and insight. Writers, artists, yet they speak to universal feelings of disconnection. This paradox highlights one of the unique aspects of existential loneliness. While it is deeply personal, it is also a shared human experience. In acknowledging our isolation, we find a strange form of connection with others who feel the same. Existential loneliness also raises questions about the nature of relationships. Can we ever truly know another person, or are our connections ultimately limited by the boundaries of our own subjectivity? Jean-Paul Sartre explored this tension in his existential philosophy, particularly in his play No Exit. He argued that while we crave connection, we often misunderstand or objectify others in our attempts to bridge the gap between ourselves and them. For Sartre, the struggle to connect authentically is an inevitable part of the human condition. Yet, existential loneliness is not necessarily something to overcome or fix. Many existentialists see it as an opportunity to confront the deeper truths of life. By acknowledging our aloneness, we are forced to grapple with questions of meaning, purpose, and identity on our own terms. This can be a source of anxiety, but can also lead to profound self-discovery and growth. In this way, existential loneliness is both a challenge and a gift. It pushes us to seek understanding and authenticity in a world that often feels disconnected. Modern psychology has also explored the impact of existential loneliness on mental health and well-being. Some researchers argue that acknowledging and accepting this form of loneliness can be a pathway to resilience and self-acceptance. By understanding that existential loneliness is a natural part of life, we can move away from feelings of inadequacy or despair and focus on building meaningful connections with others. These connections may not erase our loneliness, but can provide comfort and a sense of shared humanity. Existential loneliness is a reminder of both the limits and the richness of human experience. It forces us to face the fact that no one else can live our lives for us, think our thoughts, or feel our feelings. But it also reminds us of the value of connection, empathy, and understanding. While we may never fully bridge the gap between ourselves and others, the attempt to do so is what makes relationships meaningful. In the end, existential loneliness is neither entirely good nor entirely bad. It is simply part of what it means to be human. It challenges us to look inward, to confront our fears and uncertainties, and to find our own paths in a complex and often confusing world. By embracing our aloneness, we can learn to live with greater authenticity and openness, finding meaning not in escaping loneliness but in facing it with courage and compassion. Misanthropy and philosophy. Humanity is flawed, perhaps so deeply flawed that some philosophers have questioned whether it even deserves its place in the world. Misanthropy, defined as the distrust or critique of humanity, has long been a compelling theme within philosophy. It challenges us to reconsider our understanding of ourselves, our values, and the impact we have on the world. Importantly, misanthropy is not about hatred of individual people. Rather, it is a critical reflection on humanity's collective nature, its tendencies, choices, and the often devastating consequences of its actions. Philosophical misanthropy should not be confused with mere cynicism or bitterness. Instead, it represents a serious and rigorous critique of human nature, exploring how humanity repeatedly falls short of its own ideals. Many misanthropic thinkers focus on the harm we inflict, not only upon one another, but also upon ourselves and the planet we inhabit. One of the most notable figures in this tradition is Arthur Schopenhauer. For Schopenhauer, misanthropy arises from deep skepticism about human behavior. He viewed humanity as driven by the will to live, a blind, insatiable force that fuels constant striving, competition, and suffering. In his view, humans are far from rational or virtuous beings. Instead, they are largely controlled by selfishness, irrational desires, and endless dissatisfaction. This grim perspective paints humanity as trapped in a relentless cycle of misery and conflict, incapable of achieving true contentment or moral goodness. Friedrich Nietzsche, another pivotal thinker, approached misanthropy with a different lens. While he criticized humanity for its herd mentality and its tendency to cling to comfort and mediocrity, Nietzsche did not outright reject humanity. Rather, he saw these flaws as challenges to be overcome. His misanthropy was less a condemnation and more a call for transformation, and urging for individuals to confront their limitations and strive toward becoming overmen, Bermenschen, forging their own values and identities beyond conventional norms. For Nietzsche, misanthropy was a provocative invitation to self-overcoming and personal growth, Philosophical misanthropy often stems from a profound sense of disappointment with humanity. The ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes of Sinope, a key figure in cynicism, exemplified this attitude with his sharp critiques of human hypocrisy and vanity, famously wandering the streets with a lantern. Searching for an honest man, Diogenes rejected the social conventions and materialism of his time. His misanthropy was rooted not in hatred but in frustration with humanity's failure to live authentically and virtuously. His stance questioned the moral fabric of society and the corruption of human character through the pursuit of wealth, power, and status. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, though often seen as a hopeful thinker, also expressed misanthropic ideas, particularly in his critique of civilization. Rousseau believed that humanity was inherently good in its natural state, but had been corrupted by the constructs of society. He argued that progress and modernity had alienated people from their true nature, greed, and moral decay. While Rousseau's misanthropy was directed at the collective flaws of civilization, it also carried a belief in redemption through a return to simplicity, nature, and authentic human connection. In contemporary philosophy, misanthropy often takes an ecological turn. Environmental philosophers such as Arne N. Dees and proponents of deep ecology critique humanity's destructive exploitation of nature. They argue that humanity's anthropocentric worldview, seeing humans as the center and superior to all other life, has caused widespread environmental devastation. This critique aligns closely with misanthropy's broader distrust of human behavior, framing humanity as a dangerous force, prioritizing its own interests at the expense of ecosystems and countless species. While not all environmentalists identify as misanthropes, this perspective highlights a shared concern about the consequences of human arrogance and irresponsibility. Misanthropy can also enter existential territory, questioning whether humanity's existence has any inherent value. Émile Chorin, a 20th-century philosopher, wrote extensively about the absurdity and futility of human life. For Chorin, humanity's relentless search for meaning often masks its deeper flaws, its arrogance, destructiveness, and inability to confront its own limitations. Yet, despite this bleak outlook, Chorin's work also reveals a dark humor and a recognition of the resilience and contradictions that define the human condition. Critics of philosophical misanthropy often accuse it of being excessively harsh or dismissive of humanity's potential. They point to acts of kindness, creativity, and progress as evidence that humanity is capable of greatness. While misanthropy emphasizes human failures, it can risk overshadowing the capacity for compassion, innovation, and resilience that also exists within us. Many misanthropic philosophers, however, would argue that their critique is not a wholesale condemnation, but an invitation to confront uncomfortable truths. By acknowledging humanity's flaws openly, they believe we can begin to address them with honesty and urgency. One of the most complex aspects of misanthropy is its moral implication. If humanity is fundamentally flawed, what then should we do? Should we strive for change, or should we accept our limitations? Nietzsche viewed misanthropy as a call to action, a demand that humanity overcome its weaknesses and embrace its potential for greatness. Schopenhauer, on the other hand, leaned toward resignation, seeing humanity's flaws as inherent and unchangeable. This tension forces us to grapple with difficult questions. Are our flaws merely the product of circumstance, or are they essential to who we are? Can we truly rise above our tendencies toward selfishness, violence, and destruction? Or are these traits inseparable from human nature? Though these questions have no easy answers, they remain vital to understanding the human condition. Ultimately, misanthropy and philosophy together hold up a mirror to humanity. They ask us to confront our failures, question our assumptions, and rethink what it means to be human, not with despair alone, but with the possibility of hope and transformation. Philosophical misanthropy challenges us to engage with humanity more honestly and thoughtfully than ever before, refusing to turn away and instead encouraging a deeper, more nuanced understanding of ourselves and our world. Transhumanism. What if humanity could take control of its own evolution, enhancing our bodies and minds beyond anything nature ever intended? This is the vision of transhumanism, a movement that seeks to use technology to overcome the biological limits of the human body and redefine what it means to be human. Far from just science fiction, transhumanism is a rapidly growing field, blending philosophy, ethics, and cutting-edge science to imagine a future where humans are no longer bound by aging, disease, or even death. At its core, transhumanism starts with a simple premise: human beings are not the final stage of evolution. For centuries, we have adapted through natural selection, but transhumanists argue that we now have the power to direct our own development. Advances in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and neuroscience are making it possible to fundamentally alter the way we live, think, and relate to the world. One major goal of transhumanism is to eliminate the physical vulnerabilities of the human body. Aging, often seen as an inevitable part of life, is viewed by transhumanists as a problem to be solved. Scientists are exploring ways to slow, stop, or even reverse aging through cellular repair, genetic editing, and therapies targeting its root causes. The dream of significantly extended lifespans or even immortalities no longer purely speculative. Disease is another frontier. While modern medicine has made incredible progress, transhumanism envisions a future where illnesses like cancer, Alzheimer's, and heart disease could be eradicated. Gene-editing tools like CRISPR are already being used to correct genetic defects and strengthen immunity. Prosthetics and bioengineering innovations enable the replacement of damaged organs with stronger, more efficient alternatives. But transhumanism is not just about physical enhancement. It also aims to expand human intelligence and cognition. Brain-computer interfaces are being developed to allow direct communication between minds and machines. Such technology could enhance memory, improve problem-solving, and unlock new forms of creativity. Imagine a future where knowledge is accessed instantly, not by reading a screen, but by integrating it directly into your mind. At its heart, transhumanism is a philosophy of improvement, but it raises profound ethical questions. If we enhance human abilities, who gets access? Will these technologies be available to all, or only the wealthy? Critics worry about a new divide between the enhanced and the unenhanced, where biological advantage deepens existing social inequalities. Another concern centers on identity. As we integrate more technology into our bodies and minds, where do we draw the line between human and machine? If enough parts of us become artificial, are we still ourselves? Transhumanists argue that identity is tied to consciousness and experience rather than biology. But this challenges long-held ideas about what it means to be human and forces us to reconsider the boundaries of personhood. Transhumanism also ventures into philosophical questions about purpose and meaning. If suffering is eliminated, life extended indefinitely, and cognitive abilities vastly enhanced, what does life look like? For some, it promises endless growth, exploration, and self-fulfillment. For others, it raises fears of stagnation, boredom, or loss of humanity's essential character. If struggle and limitation define much of human experience, what happens when those elements vanish? The movement is not without critics. Some argue transhumanism's pursuit of perfection risks unforeseen consequences in altering complex biological systems. Others contend that focusing on enhancement distracts from urgent global issues like poverty, climate change, and political instability. Transhumanists respond that their vision equips humanity with the tools to tackle these problems more effectively. One of the most controversial ideas is the possibility of transcending death itself through mind uploading, transferring consciousness into a digital format. While still speculative, this concept raises deep questions. If your mind is copied into a machine, is that really you, or just a replica? What happens to the original you? Environmental implications are also significant. Some proponents believe enhancing human efficiencies, such as reducing the need for food or energy, could lessen strain on the planet's resources. Others warn of technological overreach with unpredictable effects on ecosystems and biodiversity. Ultimately, transhumanism forces us to reflect on humanity's long-term trajectory. Are we content to remain as we are, or do we embrace science and technology to redefine ourselves? It is a question of values, aspirations, and responsibility. Transhumanists believe that by pushing boundaries, we can create a future where humanity thrives in ways once unimaginable. The journey of transhumanism is just beginning. It promises to be exhilarating and challenging a vision of humanity, not as it is, but as it could become. Whether that future leads to liberation or division, progress or peril, depends on how we navigate the risks and opportunities of this extraordinary moment in history. The question is not only whether we can enhance humanity, but whether we should, and what kind of future we want to build. The paradox of freedom. Freedom has always been one of humanity's most cherished ideals, a symbol of dignity, autonomy, and self-determination. Yet, beneath its appeal lies a deep and enduring contradiction. The very thing we seek in freedom can, when taken to extremes, begin to erode its meaning. The paradox of freedom is not merely a philosophical puzzle, it's a lived reality that touches every part of our personal, social, and political lives. Imagine a world where anything is possible. No rules, no expectations, no boundaries. At first, this sounds exhilarating, a utopia of limitless autonomy. But without any structure, even the most thrilling choices lose their meaning. If nothing is forbidden, then nothing is truly chosen. When everything is permitted, freedom itself starts to dissolve into chaos. This is the essence of the paradox. For freedom to have meaning, it must operate within some form of limitation. This tension becomes especially clear when we consider the relationship between freedom and responsibility. Freedom grants us the power to choose, but with every choice comes a consequence. To be truly free, we must also own the outcomes of our actions. This weight of accountability can feel restrictive, even burdensome. Yet, without it, our freedom becomes hollow. A society that allows absolute freedom without consequences may quickly descend into harm, disorder, or injustice. This is why democratic societies, while valuing freedom, also create systems of law and accountability, not to stifle liberty, but to protect and enable it. The existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre famously described humans as condemned to be free. For some, there is no higher authority to dictate how we should live, no divine rulebook, no universal moral script. We are forced to create meaning and values for ourselves, and that freedom is as terrifying as it is empowering. In a world without predetermined paths, every decision becomes a defining act. The responsibility for shaping our lives falls entirely on us. Freedom, in this view, is not easy. It's a heavy, sometimes paralyzing burden. This paradox also becomes visible in our relationships and communities. Humans are inherently social creatures. True freedom doesn't exist in isolation. It must coexist with the freedom of others. This requires compromise. Living harmoniously with others often means curbing certain individual desires or impulses. Laws, social norms, and ethical standards all restrict behavior, but they also create the conditions for collective freedom. Without them, society would collapse into anarchy, and true freedom for all would be impossible. Freedom's entanglement with desire introduces another layer of contradiction. We often think of freedom as the ability to pursue whatever we want, but desires can become chains. Obsessions, addictions, or even relentless ambition can dominate our lives, turning freedom into a new form of captivity. In this sense, being free to follow every impulse does not guarantee genuine liberation. Rather, freedom lies in the ability to choose consciously, in alignment with our higher values, not just in satisfying every craving. The Stoics understood this well. For them, true freedom was internal, not external. It wasn't about having endless options or escaping obligations. It was about mastering the self. By focusing only on what is within our control and accepting what is not, external circumstances might change, but our response to them determines our true freedom. This idea flips the conventional notion of liberty on its head. Freedom isn't the absence of constraint, but the strength to navigate those constraints with clarity and virtue. In the modern era, the paradox of freedom has taken on new forms. We live in a world of seemingly infinite choice. More products, careers, lifestyles, and information than ever before. Yet, instead of feeling liberated, many people feel overwhelmed, paralyzed, or dissatisfied. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. When faced with too many options, we struggle to decide, second-guess ourselves, and end up less content than if we had fewer options. In this way, the very abundance of freedom can make us feel trapped and unfulfilled. Historically, freedom has often been framed as liberation from oppression, overthrowing tyrants, breaking free from unjust systems. Yet history shows that revolutions, once triumphant, can give birth to new forms of oppression. The fight for freedom can, ironically, lay the groundwork for future control. This recurring pattern reminds us that the pursuit of freedom must be paired with vigilance, humility, and a deep understanding of power. On a personal level, we often experience the paradox of freedom in our everyday struggles. Consider the artist who spends years honing their craft. They may sacrifice free time, leisure, and social life, but in doing so, they gain the freedom to express themselves fluently and deeply. Or think of someone who adheres to strong principles or commitments. They may appear constrained, but their discipline gives them a profound sense of purpose. In these examples, freedom is not about doing whatever one wants in the moment, it's about doing what matters most in the long run. Technology adds yet another dimension. We now enjoy unprecedented freedom to communicate, learn, and create, but at the same time, our tools can become traps. Social media platforms offer free expression, yet they also foster dependency, reduce attention spans, and manipulate behavior. Surveillance technology promises security, but at the cost of privacy. The innovations that promise liberation often come with hidden constraints. In the end, the paradox of freedom challenges us to think more deeply about what it means to be truly free. It is not the ability to do anything at any time, nor is it the total absence of limits. Real freedom is about balance between autonomy and responsibility, self and society, desire and discipline, expression and ethics. It requires us to recognize that limits are not necessarily enemies of liberty, they are often its foundation. The paradox doesn't diminish the value of freedom, deepens it. It reminds us that freedom is not a static state, but an ongoing practice. It invites us to live deliberately, to choose with care, and to create meaning within the structures that surround us. In embracing the paradox, we find a more mature, grounded, and enduring form of freedom, one that is not about escaping limits, but about transforming them into something purposeful and true. The red button thought experiment. Imagine a single red button placed in front of you. Pressing it would instantly, painlessly, and silently erase all of humanity. No suffering, no destruction, no aftermath, just a sudden, complete cessation of the human race. Now ask yourself, would you press it? This is the red button thought experiment, deceptively simple, yet profoundly unsettling. It invites us to grapple with some of the deepest questions we can ask. Is human life worth continuing? Is existence justified in the face of suffering? And who, if anyone, has the moral authority to make that decision for everyone? At its core, the red button confronts us with a brutal moral dilemma. Humanity has achieved incredible things: art, science, love, exploration, but it has also committed atrocities and continues to generate suffering, war, exploitation, environmental destruction, inequality, cruelty. The person considering the button is asked to weigh all of it at once. Is the net impact of our existence positive or negative? Are we, ultimately, a force of good or harm? To even begin answering this, we must first ask, is life inherently valuable? Some argue that existence is sacred, that the simple fact of being alive holds meaning regardless of circumstance. They point to love, creativity, connection, discovery, the beautiful, fleeting moments that give life texture and depth. But others, echoing the pessimism of thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer, see life as a cycle of unfulfilled desire and relentless suffering, where moments of happiness are mere interruptions in an otherwise painful existence. From that perspective, pressing the button could be seen not as violence, but as liberation. Yet suffering alone doesn't define the human experience. The paradox lies in the fact that pain and meaning are often intertwined. Without suffering, can there truly be growth, empathy, or triumph? Joy is made richer by the contrast of sorrow. Struggle can produce resilience and purpose. To end all suffering by ending all life is to eliminate not only pain, but the possibility of transcendence, healing, and beauty. The thought experiment also brings up the issue of agency and ethical scope. Even if one believes the world would be better without humans, does anyone have the moral right to end it all? Humanity is not a single entity, but billions of individuals, each with unique experiences, values, and hopes. Pressing the button assumes a godlike authority, a cold, utilitarian calculus that flattens all human complexity into a binary choice. Hope adds another powerful dimension to the dilemma. As flawed as humanity is, we have demonstrated the ability to learn, to change, and to repair. From civil rights to medical breakthroughs, there is evidence that progress is possible. Pressing the button would not just end current suffering. It would also erase our potential. It's a decision that assumes our worst is inevitably end, that our best is not worth the risk. Environmental ethics often tip the scale for those inclined to press. Humanity has undeniably wreaked havoc on the earth, driving species to extinction, polluting oceans, warming the planet. Without humans, nature might heal. Forests could regrow, wildlife flourish, ecosystems rebalance. But then comes another haunting question. Does it matter if no one is left to witness it? If a healed world exists in silence, untouched by sentience, does that restoration carry moral weight? On a psychological level, the red button forces us to examine our own emotional landscape. The urge to press may come from misanthropy, hopelessness, or despair. The refusal to press might arise from empathy, idealism, or fear of responsibility. Neither reaction is purely rational. The experiment reveals how deeply personal our moral judgments are, how intertwined with our fears, experiences, and hopes. Some versions of the thought experiment even suggest the button isn't real, it's a philosophical test, not a literal mechanism. The true challenge lies in wrestling with the idea, not acting on it. In that sense, the red button becomes symbolic. Choosing not to press it, even hypothetically, becomes an act of faith in humanity, an assertion that life, in all its mésanges, is still worth something. Ultimately, the red button is not meant to deliver answers, but to provoke reflection. It forces us to confront the staggering moral weight of existence itself. It reveals the fragile balance between despair and hope, between cynicism and compassion. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that the very act of thinking about the question, of wrestling with complexities, what defines us as human, the button remains unpressed, not because the answer is easy, but because the act of deciding is itself a mirror showing us who we are, what we value, and how much meaning we find in simply continuing to be. Simulation theory. What if everything you've ever known, every moment of joy, every hardship, every relationship, every thought existed not in a physical universe, but within a hyper-advanced simulation? Simulation theory proposes exactly this, that our reality may not be the ultimate reality, but a digital construct created by advanced beings or systems far beyond our comprehension. It's a concept that has moved from the fringes of science fiction into serious philosophical discourse, shaking the foundations of how we understand consciousness, morality, and the meaning of suffering. The implications are profound, especially when it comes to pain and hardship. If our world is simulated, if our experiences are essentially lines of code, does suffering lose its significance? Or does it gain a new kind of meaning, one tied not to biology, but to design? The theory gained momentum with philosopher Nick Bostrom, who suggested that if future civilizations develop the computational power to simulate realities indistinguishable from their own, and if they choose to create many such simulations, then it's statistically more likely we are living in one of those simulations rather than in the base reality. The argument may sound far-fetched at first, but it rests on rational premises: exponential growth in computing power, the logical potential to simulate sentient minds, and the indistinguishability of simulated consciousness from real consciousness. This leads to one of the most unsettling questions. If suffering is part of a simulation, is it real? In a physical world, pain is a biological response, a signal tied to survival and well-being. But if we're living in a simulation, that pain might be pre-programmed in algorithmic function, not a biological necessity. That raises the question: is suffering an intentional feature of the simulation? One possibility is that suffering exists to add realism and emotional depth, just as video games and virtual worlds become more compelling when they mimic human emotions and stakes. Perhaps our simulation includes suffering to replicate an authentic human experience. After all, love, triumph, empathy, these all gain meaning in the presence of their opposites. If joy were constant and unchallenged, would we even recognize it? Another possibility is more unsettling. Perhaps suffering serves an unknown purpose for the creators. If this simulation is an experimental cosmic lab of sorts, then our suffering might be data, something to be measured, analyzed, and learned from. Are our hardships being observed to study how morality evolves, how societies respond to trauma, how consciousness copes with adversity? If so, then our pain may carry meaning, but not one we are capable of understanding from within the simulation. That opens the door to uncomfortable ethical questions. If the entities running the simulation can prevent suffering and choose not to, are they morally accountable? Would we view them as cruel, indifferent, or simply operating under a set of values incomprehensible to us? From their vantage point, perhaps our simulation is a work of art, a scientific model, or even a necessary engine of spiritual development. Morality, as we understand it, may not apply or may not matter at all. Simulation theory also forces us to re-examine the nature of agency and free will. If our thoughts, choices, and emotions are the result of programmed inputs, do we truly have autonomy? If suffering is coded into our reality, do we bear moral responsibility for how we handle it, or are we merely reacting according to our scripts? Despite these uncertainties, one truth persists: suffering, whether real or simulated, feels real. The pain of loss, the ache of loneliness, the sting of failure. These are not abstract calculations. They are visceral, embodied experiences. Even if our reality is synthetic, our emotions are not diluted. They are vivid and deeply meaningful to us. This presents a paradox. Even in a world that might be fake, our reactions are authentically human. In fact, the knowledge or suspicion that we live in a simulation may grant us a unique kind of agency. If we understand that we are simulated beings, yet capable of self-reflection, empathy, and moral decision-making, then perhaps we are more than code. Perhaps we are creators within the simulation. Our choices still matter. Our compassion, our resilience, our attempts to alleviate the suffering of others, even If this is all a program, become acts of quiet defiance, declarations of meaning in a possibly meaningless world. Simulation theory doesn't just raise questions about reality. It challenges us to define what makes life worth living. If we are simulations, does that reduce the value of love, beauty, growth, or connection? Or does it make these things more precious because they exist in spite of uncertainty? The fact that we strive for meaning even without knowing whether anything is truly real may be the most profound evidence of our humanity. In the end, simulation theory doesn't give us neat answers about the origin of suffering or the structure of existence, but it forces us to confront what matters, how we live, how we treat one another, and what kind of meaning we choose to create. Whether this life is organic or engineered, it is undeniably ours, and that may be more important than knowing whether it's real.